Welcome to Trostle Talk. I am Michelle Trostle. This is episode 37. NotebookLM synthesizes information about letter names and letter sounds. Now, in episode 36, we talked about what do we teach first, letter names or letter sounds? As I was doing research for that episode, I found, I think, 17 different sources. Most of them were full length research articles. And I wanted to go through all of that information so that I was sure that I had accurate information to pass along to you. By the way, the answer to should we teach letter names or letter sounds first is both. We want to teach both letter names and letter sounds in conjunction with each other. And then we also want to layer letter formation on top of that. Give students as much brain connectivity as possible while we are teaching all these ways of knowing about letters and the sounds that they represent for reading and writing. And as I was gathering all of these articles, I thought, self, I wonder how an AI might be able to help get all of this information synthesized together to inform next steps for teachers. And so I uploaded all of the resources that I found into NotebookLM. I was able to create different kinds of documents, and I was able to create a 13-minute podcast on what should I teach first, letter names or letter sounds, informed by all of these pieces of research. And so I thought that it would be fun for us to listen to that podcast together. And then I'm going to stop at various points and sort of share my thoughts on what AI put together for this podcast. Because remember, we don't always want to believe everything that AI generates as output for us because AI can hallucinate, and we're going to see some of that. So let me find the right window that has the podcast, and I'm going to click play, and let's listen together to Notebook LM's podcast.
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay. Okay, so forget what you think you know about the ABCs.
Yeah, it seems simple, right?
Totally. But today, we're really unpacking how children learn the alphabet and the implications for reading, spelling. They're kind of astonishing.
They really are.
You're here for the
Okay, so the other thing that's astonishing is these two hosts bantering back and forth. That's all AI, totally AI.
core knowledge, the stuff that makes you go, aha, you know, without getting totally lost. And that's exactly what we've got.
Absolutely. We've been digging into some really compelling research, studies that track kids' alphabet knowledge over time,
Right.
and look at all the different ways they connect letters to sounds to names. It's much more dynamic than you might think.
So our mission is pretty straightforward, really.
Yeah, just get past the jargon.
Exactly. And get to grips with, the different journeys kids take to master the alphabet, the sort of hidden factors influencing them, and why it all matters so much later on.
Okay, let's jump in.
Let's do it.
So we know, it's well established that alphabet knowledge, knowing letter names and sounds, it's the bedrock.
The absolute foundation for reading and spelling in English.
Right. It's like the first step in cracking the code, linking those symbols on the page to spoken language.
It's how they start seeing that print actually means something, represents speech.
Sure.
But it's not just a one-way street, is it? This early alphabet knowledge seems to have this kind of back and forth.
Exactly, a bi-directional relationship. The research shows that as kids learn letters, it actually boosts their phonological awareness too.
Their ability to hear sounds in words.
Yeah, play with sounds. And even their early writing, the scribbles, trying to form letters, it's all tied together. They all feed each other.
All right, so a little note right here about these early writing that's being mentioned. They're referencing Aries phases of word learning. These are predictable phases that all children will progress through as they're learning to read and write. So I'll post more information on the SMORE. That is smore.com/NHS3A. Let's keep listening.
Okay, here's something that honestly, it stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
Oh, yeah.
One study found that a kindergartner's grasp of letter names, just the names, can significantly predict their reading comprehension. Not first grade, not second. Way down the lines, all the way in ninth grade.
Wow. Okay, that really shows the long shadow these early skills cast.
Isn't it? Almost a decade later.
But as we said, getting that knowledge isn't like everyone follows the same path. Researchers talk about these alphabet knowledge trajectories.
Which is just a kind of fancy way of saying kids learn differently, different speeds, different ways.
Precisely, like different routes to the same place.
Okay, I need to stop right here because what they're talking about sounds a lot like learning styles, and learning styles have been debunked. You know, they all learn in their own way. I don't want anyone to think that that's what this research is saying. Every child's brain needs to form the same connections, connecting the shape of the letter, the name of the letter, and the sound represented by that letter. However, some students appear to do this with more ease and less practice, meaning that they have a steeper trajectory from novice to mastery. Other students need a lot more explicit instruction and they need judicious practice. So they have a more gradual trajectory from novice to mastery. These trajectories are what we're talking about, not the actual methodologies for teaching or learning. Come on back. Okay,
One
here it
big
is.
study, it mapped out several distinct paths in preschoolers.
Okay.
For letter sounds, they found 5 groups: high, growing, delayed, average, and low average.
5 for sounds and names.
Similar, but just 4 for letter names: high, growing, delayed, and average. No low average group there.
So think of it like some kids hit the ground running, some build momentum, and some struggle to get going.
That's a good way to put it. The high group, they start preschool knowing a lot already. So you don't see huge jumps because they're already near the ceiling, so to speak.
Makes sense.
The growing group, they might start lower, but wow, they show really impressive gains across the year. They're the rapid learners.
Okay, the fast movers.
Then the delayed group, this is the one that's concerning. They start low, and unfortunately, they make very little progress over that same preschool year.
An average?
Average starts, middle of the pack, shows steady, consistent growth. Often they actually catch up to the high group by the spring, especially with letter sounds.
Right. And that last one, the low average for sounds only.
Yeah, they start with lower sound knowledge than the average group, but they do make moderate progress. They tend to end up around the average level by the end of the year.
So if we're trying to spot kids who might struggle with reading later, which paths should we really be paying attention to?
Well, the research strongly suggests looking closely at the growing and delayed groups.
Okay, why both? That seems a bit counterintuitive.
Because kids identified as being at risk for later reading problems were mostly found in those 2 groups. It shows that even within that at-risk label, there's a real mix of how kids are actually learning the alphabet. Not all struggling learners look the same early on.
That's really interesting. It brings up a big question for me. What matters more? Where a child starts out, their initial level, or how fast they learn, their rate of growth?
That is the question, really. And it's fascinating. The studies show that kids on those growing paths, the ones starting lower but learning fast, they often end up doing better later on in reading and spelling.
Better than who?
Better than the kids on the delayed path, even if they started with similar low alphabet knowledge.
So the ability to learn quickly can actually overcome a lower starting point.
It seems that way. That rapid learning ability seems to be a really powerful compensator.
But wait.
Okay, so I need to stop again. They use the phrase rapid learning ability, but I don't think that that accurately captures what's happening here. This feels helpless to me. Like either a child has a rapid learning ability and they will be fine, or they don't, and we might as well give up on those future positive outcomes already. I think this is less about the innate learning ability of a child and more about the educational system setting teachers up to provide dynamic, effective, explicit instruction. Dr. Anita Archer has an Archerism for this. It is how well I teach equals how well they learn. If students in our classrooms are on that slow growth trajectory, the first thing we need to do is take a really hard look at our instruction and ensure that we are providing the highly explicit instruction in an I do, we do, you do format that is providing plenty of opportunities for successful practice and reinforcement of the skills that our students need. Okay, deep breath, Michelle. My point here is that teachers have more levers to toggle to support students in achieving growth than what these AI hosts are acknowledging. It's not just about what the students do. In fact, very little of it is about what the students are bringing to the classroom. It's about what do we do with students once they are with us. We are responsible for achieving that growth trajectory. Okay, let's keep going. Just remember, you as the teacher have the power to make differences for your students that can impact what's happening in ninth grade. And that will impact what happens in the rest of a student's life. That's incredible. That's amazing. All right, let's keep going.
Wait, I thought I read somewhere that sometimes the high, average, and growing kids, they kind of end up in a similar place eventually.
You're right. There is evidence for that too.
See, they end up in the same place if they're growing, and you can be the one to make the difference in that for students.
That initial burst from the growing group can help them catch up, and sometimes the outcome differences between high, average, and growing aren't massive, but that consistently low minimal growth you see in the delayed profile, that seems to be a much clearer, more consistent red flag for potential difficulties down the road.
Got it. So slow and steady might win the race for some, but really slow or barely moving. That's the word.
Exactly.
Okay, so kids learn at different speeds. But what about the letters themselves? Are some just easier to learn? Is A easier than Q?
Oh, absolutely. They're definitely not all created equal in a child's mind. Several things make some letters harder.
Like what?
Well, position in the alphabet, for one. Letters right at the beginning or the end often seem easier for kids to grab onto.
A, B, C, X, Y, Z.
Okay. Yeah. And maybe, obviously, if a letter's in their own name.
The name effect.
Right. Or if it's a letter they see all the time, maybe on a favorite cereal box or a street sign. Familiarity helps a lot.
That makes total sense. Personal connection, repetition. What about the letters themselves, like inherently?
The link between the letter's name and its sound is huge.
How so?
Well, think about B. The name is B, the sound B is right there at the start. That tends to make the sound easier to learn.
Oh.
Okay, so I think she meant the sound B, not the sound B, because B is the name, B is the sound. So I actually created a graphic that lists the phonemes in each letter name to support you in identifying which letter names will be most helpful in students associating the letter sound with the letter name, and which letters might actually be difficult, like W doesn't have a in it anywhere. So you can find this graphic on smore.com/NHS3A. And it's also included in the digital resource packet that I put together and posted on TPT. That is titled Letter Name Launchpad. There are lots of other resources in there too. All right, back to the podcast.
Okay.
But then you have letters like M, name M, sound M is at the end, a bit trickier.
And then the really tough one.
Yeah, like ick or W, D, D, DL, where the main sound isn't really in the name at all.
Okay, ick, like ick. Not exactly sure what she was saying there. I think the AI just hallucinated for a little bit. Remember, you cannot believe everything produced by AI. We might get some more hallucinations in a second. Okay, listen.
Well, those connections are harder to make.
And there was something about speech development too.
Yes, exactly. For consonants, the age kids typically master saying that sound can matter. If it's a sound they haven't quite mastered in speech yet, like maybe R or SD, linking it to the letter can be harder.
So this all suggests that just marching through the alphabet A to Z, same time for each, probably isn't the best way.
Probably not the most effective, no. Traditional instruction often does that, right? Equal time for every letter.
Yeah, it seems logical on the surface.
But the research is really pointing towards differentiated instruction. Spending more time, more effort on those letters we know are typically harder for kids.
And that's where this enhanced alphabet knowledge idea comes in. EA?
Exactly. EAK instruction. The core idea is teaching the alphabet not just once, but in several cycles or passes through the year.
Multiple passes. How does that help?
The key is that each cycle is strategic. It emphasizes different things based on what we know helps kids learn. So maybe one cycle focuses on the easier letters, first letters in their name, letters with the sound at the beginning of the name. Build some confidence, right?
Okay, get some early wins.
Yeah. Then maybe another cycle tackles those less frequent letters or the ones with the trickier name sound links. It's about being more targeted.
That sounds much more, I don't know, responsive than just the alphabet song on repeat.
Definitely more evidence-based.
All right, so a little pause here. I doubt that you're going to get this type of approach from a core program because the core program isn't going to know, for example, which letters are in your students' names. You will need to collect progress monitoring data as you are teaching through your core program and determine from that which letters may need additional emphasis for your group of students. But I do want to emphasize again here that simply marching through the alphabet or doing a letter of the week type of approach is not based in the evidence and the research of what is most helpful when students are learning letter names and letter sounds.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. There's always this debate, isn't there? Names first or sounds first? What does the research say?
It's a classic debate. And yeah, the research gives us some really interesting perspectives, partly from looking at different countries.
Like a natural experiment.
Sort of, yeah. Look at England, for instance. Their early literacy instruction tends to really emphasize teaching the letter sounds first.
Okay, sounds first in England and here in the US.
Here, the emphasis has traditionally been more on teaching letter names first.
And does that lead to different patterns in what kids know early on?
It seems to. You often see what's called name superiority in US kids. Early on, they know more names than sounds initially.
Makes sense.
And conversely, in England, you often see sound superiority. Kids pick up the sounds more quickly.
But surely knowing one helps you learn the other. They're not totally separate buckets of knowledge, right?
Oh, absolutely not. They definitely scaffold each other. Knowing the name Visis for V gives you a big clue for the sound of V because it's right.
Okay, so never heard that before. Another AI hallucination. More hallucinations headed our way. I also want to say I taught first grade for 7 years in urban environments, and I'm pretty sure that very few of the parents of my students actually would have been able to correctly articulate the 44 phonemes of English and match them to the letters most typically used to represent them. I didn't necessarily want the parents of my students trying to teach that information and teaching things incorrectly. I was fine with them coming with some letter names, and then I could teach the rest from there. So, in my personal experience, I don't think that it's a big deal when children come without letter sounds to school. We just know that that is our responsibility to teach that to our students, and we can take it from there. All right, back to the podcast.
Right there.
A built-in mnemonic.
Exactly. But this transfer, as researchers call it, it can also lead to some predictable errors, especially early on.
Like what kind of errors?
Well, take Y. The name is Way. So a child relying heavily on the name might initially guess the sound is Rye or something similar instead of J.
Okay, so they're using the name as a cue, but sometimes it leads them slightly astray. They're actively trying to figure it out.
Precisely. Their brains are looking for those connections. And the research confirms they do use letter names as cues for sounds. You see it in how they perform better on letters where the sound is at the beginning of the name.
Like the B example.
Exactly. And what's really striking is that this pattern holds true even for kids who have other challenges, like speech sound issues or lower phonological awareness.
Wow, so even if they struggle with sounds in general, that letter name anchor still helps them hook onto the letter sound.
It seems to provide a really useful hook, yes.
But I remember reading something, a subtle difference for kids who later become poorer readers. Something about the pattern changing slightly.
You've got a good memory for the details. Yes, there's some evidence suggesting that children who later struggle more with reading and spelling might not show that same typical advantage for letters where the sound is at the end of the name.
Like M&T.
Right. Compared to letters where the sound isn't in the name at all, like H. It's subtle, but it might hint that the way they're trying to use the name knowledge to learn sounds is somehow different or less efficient.
Hmm, that's really nuanced. Okay, so let's pull.
All right. So we know that many reading disabilities, including dyslexia, are often related to a phonological deficit. So it only makes sense that that would show up early. So if you have students that are unable to make that connection between letter names and letter sounds, where the sound is at the beginning of the name, like B for B and T for T, or when the name is the sound is slightly removed, like M, you have mm, they can't get past that to hear the and make that connection. You really want to pay attention to the difficulty that student is struggling because it could be indicative of a larger problem. We really want to make sure that we monitor that student's growth and pay a lot of attention to what's happening.
Pull this all together. Thinking about teaching, thinking about assessment. What are the big implications here?
Well, first off, it's crystal clear. Learning the alphabet is a preschool expectation. It's critical.
Not something to just hope happens later.
Definitely not. Which means effective alphabet instruction needs to be happening right from the start in preschool and kindergarten.
And for checking how kids are doing, are those standard alphabet tests enough? Just checking off which letters they know.
They give you a snapshot, but the research suggests that might not be the whole story. A single score at one point in time can make it hard to spot those kids on the delayed trajectory, for example. They might know a few letters, but they aren't learning more.
So we need to see the movie, not just the photo.
Exactly. That's why dynamic assessment, seeing how a child learns with a bit of help, or just regular progress monitoring, tracking their growth over time, could be much more informative.
Looking at the trajectory, not just the position.
Precisely. And the really hopeful message in all this, I think, is for those kids starting out with lower knowledge.
The growing path, kids.
Yes. Their success shows that initial skills don't dictate the outcome. With good, effective, maybe targeted instruction, kids can make huge gains. Starting behind doesn't mean staying behind.
That's a fantastic point. Okay, this has been incredibly insightful, really diving deep into alphabet learning. So, quick summary. Alphabet knowledge is crucial, foundational. Kids learn it in different ways, different paths.
These trajectories.
Yeah, and both where they start and how fast they learn seem to really matter.
And our teaching needs to be smart about that, responsive to those differences.
Absolutely. And the big takeaway, maybe the most important one.
I'd say it's that all kids can benefit from really good instruction here. Initial knowledge isn't destiny.
Definitely. So here's a final thought to leave you with. We've seen that even kids facing challenges seem to naturally use letter names to help learn sounds.
Yeah.
It's like an intuitive strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So does our educational approach, wherever you are, really leverage that natural tendency enough? Or sometimes do we maybe fight against it by focusing too much on one thing, just names, or just sounds too early?
That's a great question. What are the long-term effects of those different early choices on reading and spelling down the line?
Exactly. What other questions does this whole deep dive spark for you about how literacy actually begins? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Well, that was a super exciting deep dive. Thanks for joining me to listen to that NotebookLM podcast. You might even want to go and create your own podcast on something you're trying to learn about. I just want to reinforce here at the end something that the host said. Starting behind doesn't mean staying behind, and initial knowledge isn't destiny. These are really exciting points to me because it reinforces the fact that you as the teacher can make a big difference in your classroom and for your students. So please go visit the smore.com/NHS3A to get the additional resources that I've listed on there. And you can check out Letter Name Launchpad on TPT, a collection of resources to support you, some on the Smore, but more beyond that. I have an interactive spreadsheet or Google Sheet. If you use the Google Sheet, the cells will actually turn colors to indicate the amount of initial risk your students have when they enter you based on their letter name knowledge. And we'll give you ideas and resources on supporting your students in becoming the most successful readers and writers that they can possibly be. Thanks for sticking with me through this longer version of Trostle Talk, and I will see you next time.